This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Hey, welcome everyone. So today is the Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach. We hope to have the zchus to leave the United States of America and enter Eretz Yisrael through the main passageway, which of course is Moscow. And we're going to be stopping over in Moscow. And in Eretz Hashem on Monday, I hope to have the zchus to be on Har Hazeisim. So I want to tell you something which really captured my attention, and that is the life and what we're going to discuss, the kvura of the Ben Ish Chai. Because I was very surprised to learn that I bought one of these svarim that speak about the Kivrei Tzadikim, and one of my favorites, it mentions the Ben Ish Chai, it says is buried in Har Hazeisim. And not only that, there was a picture of his kever on Har Hazeisim. So let me tell you what's so interesting about that. Okay, so it goes like this. On a Sunday, the 5th day of Elul, 5679, 1909, the Ben Ish Chai Rabbeinu traveled to the tomb of Yecheskel Hanavi. Now, the Ben Ish Chai did not live in Flatbush. He did not live in Monsey. He lived in Bavel, in Iraq. He's called Rabbi Yosef Chaim Bavel. And he traveled to the tomb of Yecheskel, who is not buried in Eretz Yisrael. He's buried in a village, the village of Kifli. It's a small town on the Euphrates River. And just to position it so you know exactly what I'm talking about, it's between Najaf and Al-Hila. So that just, it gives you a more exact location if you wanted to know exactly where the kever of Yecheskel Navi was. Now, it took him 17 hours to travel from Baghdad to the kever of Yecheskel Navi. And he took the fastest way that was available back then, which was not Mercedes, not a Lexus, but an ox-drawn wagon. Okay, it was a 17-hour journey. Fine. After staying in Kafli, he traveled to Getz, which was a 3-hour ride from the tomb, and he was stricken with the illness that took his life. Okay, early in the morning. This is we were on the 5th day of Elul. We're now up to the 8th day of Elul. So Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim, on the 13th day of Elul, in the year 5679, August 31st, 1909, he returned his soul to the Bezin Shomala, V'yatsa Nishmasai B'Tahara. So his Talmidim, who accompanied him on the journey, carried the Tzaddik's body to the city of Al-Hanaya. It's a town in Iraq, also on the Euphrates River, and then they sent a telegram to Baghdad that Rabbi Yosef Chaim, they sent the following message: Yosef Einenu, right, as the pasuk says. So the news sent shockwaves throughout Iraq, throughout Baghdad. People were crying. The rivers of tears were flowing. So they went. The leaders sent out a commission to Al-Hanaya to bring his body to Baghdad. Fine. So many prominent leaders accompanied the coffin, and they reached Baghdad on the 15th day of Elul. Okay, got it? 2 days later. Everybody came out to the Levaya to greet the Ben Ish Chai's coffin. Zakenim, Zakenois, Na'arim, Na'arois, Yoladim, Yoladois. Thousands of Goyim came to the Levaya. Thousands of Goyim. Okay? Now, an enormous crowd assembled to hear the hesped of the Talmud of the Ben Ish Chai's name is Rav Moshe Shamash. If you want a picture of Rav Moshe Shamash, we have it over here. Okay. Anyway, he looked like a big tzaddik. Many other hespedim were given. Women gathered privately to eulogize, and there were rivers of tears. Each day of the Avelos, one of the leading Chachamim were masped him, as is the custom. So the speakers were Chief Rabbi Chacham David Papa, Chacham Sason Yisrael, Chacham Ezra Dangur, the great Kabbalist Chacham Shimon Agassi. Now that's a very important name, Shimon Agassi, the author of Imrei Shimon. Yeah, the Imrei Shimon Agassi gave a famous hesped on the Ben Ish Chai that I will read to you excerpts of, and it will make your hair stand on end, the Kabbalistic revelations that he revealed about who the Ben Ish Chai really was. Okay, fine. So Chacham Yaakov Shaul Kassin recorded the following incident that occurred when the Ben Ish Chai passed away. Okay, and I was able to find this in a Sefer pre-Eitz Hagan. Okay, this I'm reading to you now from the Sefer pre-Eitz Hagan from Chacham Yaakov Shol Katzin. Okay? Belel Yud Gimel Elul. Tafrei Samach Tes. What was that night? Remember, okay? What did I say happened on Yud Gimel Elul? Tafrei Samach Tes. That's when he died. That's when he passed away. Achar Chatzois. Rav Yaakov Shaul Kasin Chacham. Yaakov Shaul Kasin was sleeping. It was after Chatzois. He was learning Kedarke B'Kodesh. Pisam Nisnam name. He dozed off. Vayar v'hinei harav Rabbi Avram Laniado. Who appears to him? Rabbi Avram Laniado. Who is Rabbi Avram Laniado? He lived from 1876 to 1925. Was an ancestor of Chacham Rabbi Rafal Shlomo Laniado, the current Rosh Hashiva of Parat Yosef. So the current Rosh Hashiva of Yeshiva Parat Yosef. This is his Zayda. Okay, listen to this. So he has a vision. Who does he see? Who does this Rabbi Yaakov Shol Katzin see? Rabbi Avram Laniado. Now, I have to say, this is not the vision of Rabbi Yaakov Shol Katzin. This is what Rabbi Yaakov Shol Katzin records, that the Mekubal Rabbi Avram Adas, this was his vision in the 13th day of Elul, Tafrei Samach Tes, and he saw Rabbi Avram Laniado, the father of Rav Meir Laniado, the grandfather of Rav Shlomo Laniado, fine, he's wearing white. So Rav Avram Adas said, where are you going? Basically in English, where are you going, pal? And Vayaneo Dalacha ki niftar harav Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zechor Levar Chayim Haba. The Rosh de Galusa Bavel. Vani Holach Avilu Shalayim. I'm going to bury him in Jerusalem. This is the dream of Rav Avram Adas, who sees Rav Avram Laniado, as recorded by Rav Yaakov Shaul Katzin. Fine. V'nisorer, and then he woke up. Rav Avram Adas woke up. Shuv nestam shenes, he fell asleep again. Vayar v'hinei huvu mitaser shalagon Rabbi Yosef Chaim Toiv Hanizgar. They were bringing his body. V'kal gadol oimdim. V'ha'abanim ploini u'ploini darshim aspidim love v'yisorer. Basically, what happened? He fell asleep again. He saw the beer of Rabbeinu, of the Rabbi Yosef Chaim. A huge crowd had gathered. Rabbis were giving eulogies, and he woke again. And no one in Yerushalayim, I mean, he lives in Yerushalayim. Nobody heard that Rabbi Yosef Chaim died, and nobody was at his levaya in Yerushalayim. He fell asleep again. Vayar v'hinehu, okay. V'azol ha'yishum yidim izan. At this time, no one in Yerushalayim knew about it. V'ulam biyadai ki megan la b'chezyon layla nechayna. He realized this was no regular dream. This was some kind of nevuah. He went to the Babylonian sages in Jerusalem. Did you hear anything about Rabbi Yosef Chaim? You know, he didn't say I had a dream that Rabbi Yosef Chaim passed away, but you hear anything? We know, we heard he was sick. The rabbi didn't say a word. Again, in this dream, what is he dreaming? He's dreaming that they buried him where? In Jerusalem. What happened? Achim Shois, a few hours later, Ba Mivrak mi Bavel Yerushalayim, a telegram arrived in Yerushalayim from Bavel. Uba Moedim Kagon Rabbi Yosef Chaim Ba'es Alois Hashachar Yud Gimel Elul B'Shmaya that Rabbi Yosef Chaim passed away. When Rabbi Avram Adas heard the dream, when Rabbi Avram Adas heard about this, he said, I just want you to know that, yeah, he passed away, and I want you to know he's buried here on Hazeisim. He said, what are you talking about? We just found out that he died. No, I had a dream. He's buried on Hazeisim. He said over his vision, and v'gam sidor lahem lasos hesped. Not only that, he said, I want you to know, I'm going to tell you now which rabbi should eulogize him, because I saw in my dream which rabbis eulogize him. This rabbi should eulogize him first, and then after him another rabbi. And they did that. They were maspid Rabbi Yosef Chaim. They're in Yerushalayim in the way that Rabbi Avram Adas dreamt the Hesped took place. Without a body. Because the body apparently was already there. Even though nobody saw it except in a dream. So I ask you, do you believe that the Ben Ish Chai is buried on Har Hazeisim? That's the beginning of the story. Somebody had a dream, Rav Ram, a great Makobel, had a dream that they carried his body, and apparently in Yerushalayim that was accepted, not that they saw it being buried there, but they followed the dream's order of Hespedim. Okay? We're just getting started. Now, this is the next thing that happened.
Are you going to check it out first?
I'm going to let you know, I'll let you know exactly. Fine. Many decades later, after the Ben Ish Chai passed away, now where is he buried? What do you mean, where is he buried? He's buried in Bavel. Nobody saw him move. In fact, to my astonishment, after I saw a picture of his kever on Har Hazeisim, I also found a picture of his kever in Baghdad. Over here. Now, one interesting thing about burials is that you can only be buried in one place, right? You know, believe me, if there was a way that a person needed 2 kvarim, they would have things going on about that. But they still have not figured out how to sell people 2 kvarim. So, meanwhile, I see a kever of the Ben Ish Chai in Baghdad. Many decades after the Rabbi Yosef Chaim passed away, his remains were reinterred by the Iraqi government. There was a man there by the name of Avram Shabtai who wrote the following eyewitness account of when they moved the Ben Ish Chai's kever in Baghdad. In 5709, that's 1949, 40 years after the Ben Ish Chai passed away, the Iraqi government wanted to lay a road over the cemetery in Baghdad. And they had to move many graves of Iraqi Rabbanim, including Ben Ish Chai. So an Arab laborer came to unearth the Ben Ish Chai. He lifted his hand, and he was paralyzed. As he's about to, reinter the Ben Ish Chai, he's paralyzed. So he said, go to Chachamim and tell them that, I can't move. So they spoke to the Chachamim, and they were told that the Chachamim only give reshus to move the grave if they show great respect, and it's accompanied by prayers and supplications, l'kavod Torah. So all the Chachamim came, including the grandson of the Ben Ish Chai, Chacham David. They gathered at their graveside, they davened mincha, they begged for a slicha. The Arab laborers began digging again, with awe and respect, and they were able to move the Ben Ish Chai, who, by the way, was buried in Har Hazeisim 40 years earlier, right? And they removed Rabbeinu's body, and lo and behold, someone had changed his bagad. He was wearing fresh bagadim. It was a miracle. Everyone saw he was covered in fresh shrouds, as if he would be buried an hour earlier, and the news spread, and it caused a great Kiddush Hashem. So this is something very strange over here. And that is, if the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael believed he was buried in Har Hazeisim 40 years earlier, then how did they find his body in Baghdad 40 years later? How is he wearing fresh bagadim? Now, here's another twist in the story. The government gave the people 3 months to move the remains of the loved ones in the cemetery there to the new cemetery in Baghdad before the old one was destroyed. Some sources say that Chacham David, the Ben Ish Chai's grandson, secretly moved the Ben Ish Chai's remains at that time. Others say that when they tried to remove his grave, it was empty because he had gone to Yerushalayim 40 years earlier. In any event, if you go to check out the maps of the new cemetery in Baghdad, there is no sign that shows a grave for Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim. And then it writes over here, this is the book, the biography of the Ben Ish Chai. Listen to this. I heard from a reliable source who requested to remain anonymous. Now, I always question any reliable source that requests to be anonymous. He told the author that he knows exactly where the Ben Ish Chai is buried in Baghdad, and one day he would like to bring him to Har Hazeisim. So right now we have about 4 or 5 possibilities. Either when Chacham Avraham Adash dreamt that he moved to Yerushalayim in 1909, that he was buried in Yerushalayim in 1909, or when they wanted to move his body 40 years later, they found his guf and it was fresh, or it was found empty, or they moved him at 1949, or he's in the old cemetery in Baghdad, or he's in the new cemetery in Baghdad. So it's very confusing. What would you say? You would think if he was buried in Baghdad and nobody saw him move, except for somebody had a dream that he moved, it's hard to assume that he's buried on Hazeisim just because somebody had a dream that he moved there. Then he writes like this: the question surrounding the Ben Ish Chai's body, or maybe soul, that's another option. Maybe the body is in Baghdad and the neshama is on Hazeisim, remains a very controversial one. And this really shook me up. The view of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, the view of Mekubal Rav Yitzchak Kaduri, the view of Rav Benayahu Shmueli, is that in fact the Ben Ish Chai is on Har Hazeisim. So the Mekubalim believe the Ben Ish Chai moved. How he moved, who saw him move, very unclear. So my Rabbi said, to me, this was very difficult to understand. How? I mean, just because somebody had a dream that he moved, ein chaloim b'loy dvarim b'teah. Who said it? What does that mean? So let me tell you, there's another dream that happened. Okay? And this dream I saw in a book, Legacy of Leaders, also by the same person who wrote the biography on the Ben Ish Chai. His name was Chacham Yehuda Azulai. He, who's a descendant of the Chida, he writes like this: Rabbi Yosef Chaim, we said, came to Al Kafil in Elul, 1909, and he went to the kever of who? Yechezkel HaNavi. On his way back to Baghdad, in the village of Gez, on the 13th of Elul, he became ill and he died at the age of 77. His body was taken to Baghdad, and the funeral was held the night of the 15th of Elul. So he died Yud Gimel, funeral was Tesvav. Chacham ben Sion Chazan, another person, okay, had a dream on the next day. Now this is a different dream than Rav Avram Adas. He dreamed that one of the older members of the Chevra Kadisha of Baghdad, who came to Yerushalayim, became a grave digger in Har Hazeisim. So you ready for this? Chacham ben Sion Chazan had a dream that one of the older Baghdadi grave diggers, who is now digging graves in Har Hazeisim, visited him and he said, I need 2 Megidi. Who knows what Megidi are? Turkish coins. Okay? I'm surprised nobody knows. Okay? Rabbi Sion asked him, why do you need money? You're a beggar? He said, what do you mean? I just dug a grave. That's how the fee I take. So he said, whose grave did you dig? He said, what do you mean, whose grave? I just buried the Ben Ish Chai in Har Hazeisim. So Rabbi Sion thought the old man became Meshuggah. So he gave him the money in the dream. But he was afraid, maybe there's some truth to the words, so he continued to ask him, where did you bury the Ben Ish Chai? I hope you gave him a nice spot. The gravedigger said, of course, right next to his uncle, who died recently, the righteous Chacham Abadallah Chaim. The gravedigger continued and said, yesterday morning, 20 men who belonged to that Sadiq's family, I remember them from Iraq, came to my house. They told me that they have the body of the Ben Ish Chai, and they said, please dig him a grave next to his uncle, so he could be buried b'kavod. I did what they said. I finished my labor. And they said, go to you, Rabbi Ben Sion, you're going to pay for it. And then Rabbi Ben Sion woke up. Now, most people, if they have a dream that people are charging them money, they call up the credit card company and they realize, no, it's just a nightmare. But this Rabbi Ben Sion was shaken by the words. In his dream, he put on his coat, he put on his belt, followed the grave digger to Har Hazeisim, and saw the fresh grave that buried next to his uncle. And Rabbi Ben Sion in his dream burst out into tears. Then Rabbi Ben Sion awoke, he remembered his dream, and he never wanted to tell anybody about it. So again, Rabbi Avram Adas told the people right after the P'tira of the Ben Ish Chai. But Rabbi Ben Sion, what was his name again? Rabbi Ben Sion Hazan, he had the dream that the gravedigger came to him demanding the fee, and in the dream he went to the Makom and he paid him, and then he woke up and he never told anyone about the dream. He kept the dream a secret his whole life. However, in 1948, when the Jordanians were coming into Jerusalem and they were about to take Chacham ben Sion Hazan captive, he said, if I'm taken captive, the dream will remain a secret forever. So right before they kidnapped him, he told the story to his friend Chacham Ephraim Menashe HaKohen, that in fact that I had this dream that the Ben Ish Chai was buried on Har Hazeisim. Mar Rabbi Sai. So what are you going to do with this story? This story seems to indicate that in fact the Ben Ish Chai is also buried on Har Hazeisim. So there are two dreams about it. But still, he was seen to be buried in Baghdad, and people are dreaming he's buried in Yerushalayim. So let me tell you what it says on the kever of the Ben Ish Chai in Har Hazeisim. Listen to the lashon. Ready? Ben Ish Chai, Rav Pa'alim, Rabin Shal Kol Bnei Agoyla, Go'inu Zeinu, Mareinu Rabbeinu, Atar Zorshenu, Mishiar Gnazel, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. L'chayel Mava, Yud Gimel Elul, Tafresh Samach Tes. And on the Matzeva, it records the two dreams. Okay? Lefi Eidus HaMekubal Rav Ramadas, Asher Cholam Al Havar Mitas Mibam L'Shalayim. Rav Ramadas, the Mekubal, had a dream that he was moved to Har Hazeisim. Gam Beha Kids, Ba HaKavran Eitzel Chacham Ben Sion Chazan. The grave digger also came to Ben Sion Chazan. And he asked for money. That's not a dream. He charged, the grave digger charged money. Bikesh Chatzi Lira Zav, to be buried next to his uncle, Abdullah Moshe Chaim. And Reb Ben Sion Chaim went to the kever, and he saw Taka was dug there. And every year Chacham Ben Sion went here and he said Kaddish. This is the very interesting controversy about the grave of Chacham Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, where many Mekubalim believe that today he was moved to Har Hazeisim. Doesn't mean his body was transferred, his guf was transferred. Both, I guess we'll never know for sure. But that is the Masorah in Klal Yisrael, and this Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Yitzchak Kaduri, their Mekabala is that in fact the Ben Ish Chai was transferred to Har Hazeisim, Yushalayim. We should be taka b'zoicha to Tchias HaMeisim. And then one of the first things I would be curious to ask the Ben Ish Chai is, Chacham Yosef Chaim, where in fact were you buried? Rabbi Sai? That was just the first part of the kvura of the Ben Ish Chai. But now let me share with you, if you're still a little bit intrigued by this episode of the movement of the Ben Ish Chai la'achar misasai, let me tell you about the hesped that was given to the Ben Ish Chai by one of the great Mekubalim. The Mekubal's name, I have the hesped over here. The Mekubal's name was Reb Shimon Agassi. Shimon Agassi, one of the great Mekubalim, a Talmud of the Ben Ish Chai. It's recorded in the Sefer Imrei Shimon, and he also makes mention of the fact that the Ben Ish Chai may have been moved. This is a hesped that he gave. It's Mamish Oyim Hanaira. So one of the Rabbanim who eulogized him during the week was Chacham Shimon Agassi, who at that time was not a prominent figure in Baghdad. He never spoke publicly, in fact. He never wanted to give a eulogy. It's only because the Ben Ish Chai came to him in a dream and told him to eulogize him that he agreed to eulogize him. Now, very interesting, Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri pointed out that one of the reasons Chacham Shimon Agassi never spoke in public is because he was a major stutterer. However, when he delivered a eulogy for the Ben Ish Chai, he spoke flawlessly, seamlessly, and from then on, he was cured for good. Okay? And he writes as follows. You ready for this? This is Oyim V'Noira. He says, the Gemara tells us that how important it is to give a tzaddik kavod at the time of his patira. The Gemara even says, anybody who is at the kavura and the misa of Rabbi, the Gemara says in Ksubas and Daf Kuf Gimel, the day that Rabbi passed away, a bas kol came in and said, anyone who is at Rabbi's levaya is mezuman l'chayo olam haba. So there was a certain launderer who couldn't make it, and he said, I wasn't there that day, what's going to be with me? And he jumped off the roof, and the bas kol said, you could also go to olam haba. That's what the Gemara says. So says the Mekubal, Reb Shimon Agassi, that this applies to anybody who is at the levaya of the Ben Ish Chai as well. And he says, how do I know that? How do I know that anyone who's at the levaya of the Ben Ish Chai is mezuman l'chai olam haba? He says, Mishum shekafi shani makir v'yodea, I know, sheshoresh neshmasa shamori v'rabi ateras roishi hi mebechinas hayisoid. I know that his neshama came from the Kabbalistic sphere called Yisoid. You know what the proof is? His name was Yosef. You know why? Because he was the Gilgal of Yosef HaTzadik. That the Ben Ish Chai was the Shora, had the same Shorsh Neshama as Yosef HaTzadik, which was Bechinas Yisoid. And therefore, we see that Rabbeinu Ben Ish Chai is Malay V'Gadosh, Chachma, Mada. He was Yisoid. Yisoid is Koilal, all the Spherois. Why? And the proof is all of his Sfarim have the Aralashon of Yisoid. Binayahu, builder. Ben Yehoyada, Ben Ishchai, Pa'alim. All of these descriptions are marumas to the sphere of Yisoid. And not only was Yosef HaTzadik from the Sharish of Yisoid, but Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was also like the Arizal writes. Since they're all Misharish Echad, just like anyone who's at Rebbe's Levaya was Mazum and L'chayil Mabah, anyone who's at the Ben Ish Chai's Levaya is Mazum and L'chayil Mabah. And what about all the people now this is very interesting. Says Reb Shimon Agassi, what about all the people who couldn't make the Levaya? Because the Levaya was in the middle of the night, and many people thought the Kfir would be during the day. And they're very distressed by the fact that they missed it. They're also Mazum and L'chayil Mabah, just like the launderer who was mitztayer that he couldn't make Rebbe's Levaya is Mazum and L'chayil Mabah, so too these people. Now listen to this. And in my opinion, says the Mekubal Shimon Agassi, the Ben Ish Chai comes from the same root of neshama as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And I'm going to be Megala Asoy to you. I'm going to be a Hoylech Racha Megala Asoy. Why did Hashem make it that the Ben Ish Chai should be pass away somewhere else to go breathe in the cool air and the clear air in Chala? Because he wasn't healthy, and then they had to bring him to Baghdad. You know why? The same thing happened to Rabbi. That's what happened to Rabbi. The Gemara in Ketubah says Rabbi was in Sipari, but his Makam Kvur was in Beis Sha'arim. So look at this, says Reb Shimon Agassi. Look how Hashem turns to, Hashem's eyes are always on those who fear Him. What happened to Rabbi? Just like what happened to Rabbi Yosef Chaim? Just like he was recuperating in Chala, and he was buried in Baghdad, that is exactly what happened to Rabbi. And you'll say, so why did that happen to Rabbi? It all goes by the Shayrash. Who's the Shayrash? Yosef! The same thing happened to Yosef. Yosef passes away in Mitzrayim, he's temporary in Mitzrayim, and then he's moved later on to Shechem. So, this was the great revelation of Chacham Shimon Agassi at the Levaya, that the Ben Ish Chai was a root of none other than, don't go anywhere, was none other than the root of Yosef HaTzadik. Now he says something tremendous. Now Reb Shimon Agassi, you said another thing. Just like Chacham Yosef Chaim was rooted in Yosef HaTzadik, just like when Yosef HaTzadik was thrown into a pit and he was saved, so too the Ben Ish Chai, when he was a young boy, drowned in a deep well and was also saved from the well. What happened? Ben Ish Chai was very, very young. He went outside to play with his sister. He was playing near a deep well. He lost his balance. He fell in. His sister came running to his mother. Yosef drowned! Yosef drowned! All the neighbors heard. They came running. And the mother stood off by the side, weeping. The doctors worked on him. Basically what they did was, they took a rope. They let loose of the loose end of the rope. They took hold of the loose end of the rope. And they let somebody down into the pit. The guy grabbed him, and then they yanked out this, lifeguard. The boy comes up. He's not breathing. Doctors arrive. The boy's unconscious. Doctors say, it's all over. But they didn't despair. He was carried upstairs to the bed. The father was saying Tehillim. The doctors working feverishly to treat the boy. Suddenly, Yosef took a deep breath, and he let out a cry. They couldn't believe it. Yosef was alive. Oid Yosef Chai, they said. Oid Yosef Chai. The boy went back to sleep. He woke in the morning. He didn't remember anything. The mother gave him a hot drink. He looked as good as new. From that moment on, he took a neder upon himself that if Hashem saved my life, he's going to dedicate his entire life to Limud Torah and Avodas Hashem. However, the Mekubal Shimon Agassi says this is also another proof that he had the same Shoresh Neshama as Yosef HaTzadik, and they were both saved from the well. And just like Yosef was Majber L'chol Am Ha'aretz, Chacham Yosef Chaim also provided Torah to the entire world, L'chol Mavakshe Devar Hashem. Should be a Me'el Yosher, Yehi Zichray Baruch.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.